Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the September 2023 general meeting of the Minnesota Astronomical Society. We have a packed event tonight, so with a lot of things. So we're going to kind of run through a few of the beginning slides. So here we go. Although I think I am. Oh, yes. Judy Babcock took this beautiful image of the western part of the Veil Nebula in SHO processing, which I don't know what that is. A narrowband. Okay. All right. Perfect. I just thought it was really pretty. It's great. So thank you for letting me steal it. Perfect. Where? The board is mostly in-house tonight, as far as I know. We've got me, we've got John here, we've got Dave here, we have Matt here, Conrad, Ahmed. We have everybody from the board here. So we could have a meeting, but we won't. It's okay. Big decisions are on a later date. Tonight is here for your entertainment and education, if at all possible. And this is compliments of vaults with the Seahorse Nebula. Took me a little bit to figure out what it was, but it's really, really, really nice. Thank you. And then my favorite part of the night, well, one of many, is welcoming our new members. We have a vast list of 27 new members through August, along with 3 returning members. So congratulations to everybody that's joining us. Is there anybody in the house tonight that's got your name up on the list? Hey, welcome. And who? All right. And anybody at home, put in the chat, hi, I'm new. And, everybody clap for them as well if there's anybody there. So hopefully you are having a good time listening to this. And oh, excellent, excellent.
We have one here. It says Pawan Dixit.
Yep. Correct? And then Christy Erickson.
Christy Erickson. Okay, you got it.
So welcome.
Sorry, I probably killed the name there. Sorry. Oh, Glenn Hirabayashi. Sorry. Rosman Zambri.
Yeah.
But this is like worse than YouTube.
And I apologize if I misspelled a few things. I was doing some of these slides late at night. So,
well, welcome to y'all. Thank you very much. Good to hear from you, and maybe we'll see you at a star party.
Yep. Why did I? Oh. Technical difficulties. I did something weird. Okay. I know. New computer too. So, all right, there we go. All right, so events for the upcoming month. We have the sunrise at 6:42 and sunset 7:41. So it's definitely changing, but that's okay. Throughout, last quarter moon to the new moon to our first quarter moon, then we have our equinox, and then our days start getting longer. So that'll be great. But then it's, of course, getting colder. So we won't talk about that quite yet. I'm not ready for that. And then on October 5th, we are back here in person and or online. But hopefully you'll be here in person because we are trying to have some really good incentives for you to come here and see everybody face to face, besides the camaraderie, the silliness, and anything else that could possibly happen in our meetings. Just listen to a few other months, you'll know what's going on. All right, and then we have our Loaner Scope program. So if Antone could come up here for a moment and talk to us about our beautiful Loaner Scope program, sure. Which is, yep.
Yes, our members, as always, can use one of our 18 loaner instruments. We have Dobbs, we have Cassegrains, we have some refractors, a solar scope, and a big pair of binoculars. Members can reserve a scope or request one online under membership, Loaner Scope program, and you'll see the entire list there. Just submit your first, second, and third choice. It comes right to me, and I get back to you fairly quickly. And I'll let you know if that instrument is available, or if not, when it will be for you. The procedure is that you meet at my house and you check it out in my driveway, and a month later you bring it back to me. We also have DVDs. You can put those up. There we are. These are the Great Courses DVDs on astronomy and astrophysics. They're really very good, and they are much underused here. So if you want to learn anything about astronomy, check out our list and borrow one of those.
Thank you, Anton. Give that back to Matt. Although if I get too close, it'll boof. The great courses are really interesting, and they're nice to listen to in the background as you're, doing things around the house or, traveling. I would highly recommend them. So perfect. And then I was asked to mention the Observer's Handbook 2024 that I believe comes out of Canada. There is a posting on the forums requesting a group order to be submitted, and Clayton is taking care of that, correct? Do you have enough people, or do you? Okay. Okay, wait another week or so before you kind of close it out. You'll just kind of give us a little last chance warning, but check it out. If not, email Clayton and say, hey, I want a book and I want in on that. So, yep. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Upcoming star parties. We have the ELO public star party, which of course we always need key holders to come out and help join in the fun and talk to people and run the scopes, and just kind of be there to answer some questions, along with the BSIG that got its date changed, is tomorrow, last minute change instead of Saturday because of the weather. So just kind of keep an eye on that one. Yes, Mark. It's only the 23rd? I thought we were doing 2 of them. Okay, my apologies. So September 23rd is Cedar Creek's public star party. Yeah, open house with a solar day. So check it out. That should be up on our website for updated information there as well. And then of course, Fall Astronomy Day back at ELO. Everybody come out, have some fun. The eclipse. I know it's getting close. Everybody's getting excited for the annual run. Correct. Yay. But hold off. We will know what's going on with that, and that, we'll get some information out there. And if you're not familiar with what an annular is versus the total, just wait a little bit here. And then of course, then I think on the forum, somebody posted that there was a lecture at the U of M free to the public. So, but now I'm going to give it over to Mark for a little bit to talk about Globe at Night.
Oh, cool. You got my slide there. Globe at Night, us as MAS members should be paying very close attention to the fact that we're losing our dark skies almost 10% every, I can't remember the exact fact, but I think it's the 10% every 10 years. I believe is the right number. And then for my taste, that's a little too fast. It actually should be going the other way. And that's my point, is there's a citizen science project going on right now, and it has been going on. It's been going on for a couple of years. I think we should get out there and help this organization collect some data so that they can start going and showing some of these metropolitan areas that showing them the damage that they're doing to the dark skies. And it's not just us astronomers. I mean, it's us from a health perspective. It affects our health. Blue light is bad. I mean, there's studies out there where it affects our sleep cycle. It's not proven, but it is kind of one of the things that they're talking about is it's a possibility it's causing breast cancer in women. It also, causes, because we're not getting our sleep, us people that are older and a little out of shape, and have a chance of getting diabetes. It also has that bad thing going with it too. So, help us out. the campaign starts this month from September 5th to the 14th. It's just one constellation this month because it's big enough, it's bright enough, it's high in the sky for us. So you just have to go out and look up, and you don't have to be anywhere dark. Go out your backyard, take a reading, go in and log it on Globe at Night under the little tab that says, I think it says report, you know, and report what you find. Yes, sir. Question in front.
Send up 40,000 satellites into orbit, and the astronomers are really concerned about it.
Yes, we are. They show up in my my subframes every night. I know very much aware of them, and he's not helping, but neither are we. So that's kind of my point. And then the other thing is save the date. Starry Skies North, which I'm a member of, we are doing a event out at ELO on, is it up there? October 7th, I think. Oh yeah, October 7th. So that whole crew is coming out to ELO. We're going to do some presentations about dark skies. We're going to do some presentations and just general table talks about anybody that shows up and is interested in hearing more about the dark sky. So that's all I got. You have any questions, get a hold of me. Clayton. The nighttime. It'll be that's a public star party night, so it'll start at 7. Yeah, Starry Skies North will bring speakers. And we're not the IDA anymore. We are just dark sky. DA. Yeah, dark, yeah, they messed that up. I don't even want to talk about it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Backtracking, I did forget about one public service announcement date, which is Rebecca is going to host the new member orientation early in October. We will get back to you and have it on the forums and on the calendar with that particular dates specifies. We thought we had it, but we didn't. So just, touch base. Yeah, we'll get it out there for you. Okay. Next is where Jerry Jones would normally be here in his fun and wonderful self, but he is off doing his own thing at the moment. But I do get to actually, backtracking, tell you all about the Astronomical League Awards, which are programs that that are observing programs that anybody can complete at any time, any length of time, to win or not win, complete an observing list, turn it in, and then you get a certificate and a pin that goes along with that. And it gives you some place to start and or continue with your observations when you kind of go, I don't know what else to do. Check them out. There's like over 80 programs on the AL League's website to help you, focus your direction, try something new, and have some guidelines along with it. So I highly recommend that. So I actually do have one giveaway that somebody wanted or completed. Words. And that is for Larry Kane. So if I could have Larry Kane come up here. He has completed his basic level, or basic is a basic level, and it's the first level of the outreach program. And here is his certificate. So here you go. And I finally got to sign it.
Yeah.
My first signing act certificate as president. So congratulations.
And too.
And you got the pen.
Yep,
Isn't that lovely?
Yep.
Lovely. I love it. So,
Okay.
tell us a little bit of how you got that first level.
Well, first of all, when I joined Mass, outreach was not on my to-do list. Really, it really wasn't.
It never is. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, it does. It really does. I became a key holder at JJC, and then Bellwin had their 50th anniversary. Mass had the observatory open for the folks with the solar scope, and I thought, well, I'd give it a try, and I had a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun, showing people the sun and all the prominences and sunspots.
Oh yeah, education.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And then I became a key holder at ELO. And right after that, there was the last party of the year. And I thought, well, I might as well go and try that too. And again, it was a lot of fun. So I just enjoy the oohs and ahs and wow, you know,
Yeah.
of seeing things through the telescope. So,
Perfect, perfect.
and this one is really pretty easy. It has
Yeah.
to be 5 events, and you have to have 10 hours.
10 hours. Yeah.
But with ELO, I mean, 5 events is 25 hours. So, so 5 more events, and I'll have like 70, and I'll get my next step. I think it's called Stellar or something like that.
Yeah, Stellar. And then there's, is it Master and then Stellar? I don't remember which one it
Well,
is,
well, the
but
next
yeah,
one- next one
there's
is-
2 more levels that you can
Yeah.
get to. So,
Oh. So that's it. I mean, this
Perfect.
is really a fun one to get. It's effortless. It really is.
excellent.
Okay.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, the outreach is really, really easy because all you have to do is keep track of your hours, and they provide you a spreadsheet and it adds up all the numbers for you. You just put in your dates, your hours, and there you go. And you can send that entire Excel spreadsheet off to the AL League and they'll send you that cool certificate and the pin. So well done, Larry. Gemini articles. I know we kind of tout this one every single month, but it is actually a very much a need from Father Brown. He sent me an email the other day saying, I need some articles for the end of the year. So I challenge the people that are going to do the solar eclipse or the annular eclipse to write something about that, write about your road trip, write about how you prepared for it, and submit that to Father Brown. And that way all the rest of us can read about it. This is member only articles that no outside source publishes anything within ours, and it comes out 6 times a year. And it's always fascinating to read what all of you have interests in, and you never know what will spark somebody else's interest. So give it a shot. Short, small, long conversations. It's anything we want to read about. So please submit them. It's gemini@mnastro.org. Otherwise, we can, work with you on getting that article to Father Brown. So thank you. Thank you. And of course, the happenings, if there are any things of note that you want published, book orders or new member orientation, send it over to the secretary and he will get that posted. So that way everybody that may or may not attend these meetings knows what's going on, and can get some interest into that as well. So, and then of course, better know a constellation. Looking for volunteer for October. We don't need one this month because I have a special presentation for you that I set up, which took a few people by surprise, but I had the benefit of a person that we all know and love, Brandon Hamill, helping me. So thank you, Brandon. But for October, come see me. We want to have you talk as well. It's not as scary as you think. Yes, there's a lot of people looking at you, but it's okay. And then at this point, I would like to actually ask Bob to unmute, and we're going to have him take over the next little parts of this, and we're going to kind of work together to advance slides if he is able to. So, all right.
My name is Bob Yoesle, and I got asked to do a solar presentation on the eclipses coming up for you. And I just want to let you know ahead of time, this is a very basic introduction to eclipses. No math is involved really. And for a lot of you, you probably know more about solar eclipses than I do. So I hope I'm not disappointing anybody if you expected a lot of detailed information about math and the exposures for imaging and things like that. That is not what this talk is meant to do. This is an introduction into the wonder of eclipses, and especially for me, the upcoming total solar eclipse on April 8th next year. Alrighty, so next slide. This is basically a celestial event where the moon catches up to the sun. Next slide. And we have 2 of these relatively close to each other. We have the upcoming annular eclipse on October 14th, and then the total solar eclipse on April 8th. And they cross their paths in Texas, which is kind of fortuitous. for a lot of different reasons. Next slide. The sun, of course, is the nearest star, very big and very bright, and needs to be properly filtered to look at. So we'll cover that a little bit. Next slide. And the moon is our sister planet, basically. Of all the planets in the solar system, the moon is probably the largest proportional body to the planet it orbits. And that's kind of a neat thing to realize. Next slide. The distance from the Earth to the moon is about 250,000 miles. And here is a representation of the sun in comparison. The sun is 109 times the diameter of the Earth and about 400 times the diameter of the moon. Next slide. So this works out really well because even though the moon is 1/400th the size of the sun, it's 400 times closer, which makes the moon and the sun roughly about the same size, apparent size in the sky of about 1/2 degree. Next slide. And when we have shadows with the new moon, we can get a solar eclipse. Next slide. So you can see in this diagram with the Earth, the moon, and the sun that we have a potential for eclipses at 2 points in the moon's orbit around the Earth, at new moon and at full moon. But we don't get an eclipse every time we have a new moon or a full moon. And that's due to something else. Next slide. It happens to be that the moon's orbit is inclined to the ecliptic by 5 degrees. So most of the time, the moon and the Earth's shadows are not lined up on the ecliptic, and we don't have an eclipse when there's a new moon or a full moon, unless the line of the nodes, next slide, are lined up. This diagram will kind of demonstrate that. As the moon is orbiting, there are 2 places, the nodes, where the moon's orbital path crosses the ecliptic plane. And those have to be lined up with the sun in order for there to be a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. Next slide. So you can see that the line of the nodes only occurs twice a year. And again, this is when we can have both and either a solar eclipse of some degree or a lunar eclipse of some degree. Next slide. If we're not quite near or on the node, it's also a possibility for having partial eclipses, either partial eclipses of the sun or partial eclipses of the moon. So those are near node misses, partial eclipses. Next. A little bit of detail here. There are several parts of a shadow of a celestial body, and in this case, the moon or the Earth. We have the penumbra, where the entire part of, in this diagram, if that was the Earth, the sun wouldn't be covered. We have the umbra, where the entire disk of the sun would be eclipsed. And then there's another part of the shadow beyond the umbra called the antumbra, where the moon would pass in front of the sun, but it's smaller in diameter, and that's where we get the annular eclipse. Next slide. So here you go. The moon is always, if it's going to, go through the Earth's shadow, it's close enough that it generally will not ever be in the Earth's antumbra. It would always either be in the penumbra or the umbra. And then on a solar eclipse, we have the umbra, the penumbra, where you get either a solar total eclipse or a solar partial eclipse. Next slide. So we can have different types of eclipses for the moon: a penumbral eclipse, a partial eclipse when part of the moon goes only into part of the umbra, or a total eclipse when the moon goes totally within the Earth's umbral shadow. And similarly, with the sun, we get a partial eclipse when the shadow of the moon is in the penumbra, an annular eclipse when the moon is a little farther away and doesn't cover the entire sun as in the antumbra, and then a total eclipse when we're completely within the umbra. Next slide. There's another thing in eclipses called the eclipse magnitude, and that simply is the percentage of the sun's disk that is covered by the moon. You can see in an annular eclipse, it's less than 1, and in a total eclipse, it's greater than 1. Next slide. There's also another thing called the contacts during an eclipse, and this is simply the portions of the eclipse where the moon first touches the disk of the sun, and then the moon's inner edge touches the edge of the sun in the total eclipse phase and goes to the other side. We have the third contact, and lastly, the fourth contact when the moon leaves just barely touching the edge of the sun at the end of the eclipse. Next slide. It was noticed a long time ago, longer than you would think, that eclipses occur periodically, both lunar and solar eclipses. But for solar eclipses, they occur every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. And these eclipses are very similar. They occur at the same node, at a similar Earth to moon distance, and about the same time of each year. And you'll notice because they aren't an exact even number of days, they vary by 8 hours, the Earth will have rotated 8 hours or 120 degrees between the various Saros series. So that's kind of an interesting thing to see, that 1/3 of the Earth has rotated from Saros to Saros. Next slide. So the Saros again was discovered in pre-Christian times. And it's really fascinating that humans were able to discover this. But then back then, people were much more familiar with the natural world and especially the night sky, and could make records of what they observed. And they were very observant of the sun, the moon, and the stars for determining when to plant harvests and the like. And they discovered apparently there was this Saros. Now, the eclipse Saros begins at one pole and ends at the other. And when the eclipses get closer and closer to the equator, they become longer and longer in duration. And eclipses near the equator have the longest possible duration, just because that's where the shadow is a lot wider and the moon is closer to the Earth at that point. Next slide. There's 3 periods that make up the Saros. One is the synodic or new moon to new moon period. One is the anomalistic period, which is perigee to perigee. And the other is the draconic or node to node periods. And when these periods line up harmonically, you get an eclipse, and these eclipses again are all related by their particular Saros number. Next. So there you see when you have 223 synodic and 239 anomalistic and 242 draconic periods line up, you get the music of the spheres. There's a harmonic convergence. Next slide. And that's what makes up the Saros. You get these eclipses that are all related to each other. And they will last, a particular Saros will last thousands of years from one beginning to the end of it. Next slide. Another interesting thing that occurs with eclipses, because of the synodic period being less than a calendar month, and the nodal periods being less than a calendar month, eclipses will actually advance from year to year, and they're all clustered around the nodes. So you can see in this diagram that you can often have, say, look at 2018 there, you have 3 eclipses in July and August. In 2023, we had in April, May, we had a hybrid eclipse followed by a partial lunar eclipse. And this October, we'll have the annular eclipse followed by a partial lunar eclipse. And then in April, we'll have a partial lunar eclipse followed by a total eclipse. And again, this is all related because the new moon and full moon are only separated by less than 2 weeks, and they occur around the nodes. So we often get this clustering of eclipses around those periods of time. Next slide. Another important thing to realize with eclipses and how they work is that we have the geometry of the Earth's orbit around the sun. It's not a perfect circle, it's an ellipse. And actually in the summer, the sun is a little farther away than it is in the winter at perihelion. Next slide. The moon, and these diagrams are exaggerated. The moon, on the other hand, also has a elliptical orbit, but it's a little bit more elliptical, exaggerated. And that results in a variance in its size in the sky as well. So next slide. You can see that these are the relative sizes of the moon and the sun at perihelion and aphelion, and perigee and apogee. And you can see that this geometry affects whether an eclipse will be a total eclipse or a partial eclipse, and how long the eclipse will last for. If we have a perigee full moon, or new moon rather, if we have a perigee new moon in the summer when the sun is at aphelion, the moon is going to be much larger than the sun, and therefore the eclipse will have a much longer duration. Next slide. So we have a partial eclipse when you're in the penumbra of the moon's shadow, and outside of the penumbra, you see no eclipse at all. Next slide. In annular eclipse, the moon is at apogee, farther away. So part of the Earth is in the penumbra and has a partial eclipse, but the path of the antumbra doesn't cover the moon diameter doesn't cover the entire disk of the sun. So we have the ring of fire annular eclipse. Next slide. But when the moon is near perigee and we have eclipse, if you're in the umbra, the moon will cover the entire disk of the sun, and depending on how large the moon is relative to the sun will determine the duration of the eclipse again. Next slide. So this is the relative percentages of the eclipses and how many out of 100 would occur. Next. What's that? Next. These are called hybrid eclipses. Next slide. So we just had one of those, and that's where the moon is at the right distance, that a part of its shadow is an antumbral eclipse or an annular eclipse. And then part of it, as it gets towards the center of its eclipse path, is an umbral eclipse or a total eclipse. And then as the Earth rotates again, it becomes an antumbral eclipse or an annular eclipse. And those are the rarest of the eclipses, these hybrid eclipses. Next slide. So on October 14th, we have an annular solar eclipse, and that's the antumbral track. And it starts in Oregon and ends up leaving the continental United States and Texas. And a lot of people, especially for solar eclipses, will, I've asked people, have you seen a total solar eclipse? And just this past weekend, somebody in Portland said, yeah, I saw the total eclipse. And I said, where were you? Oh, I was in Portland. Well, unfortunately, if you were in Portland, you didn't see the totality eclipse. You saw a partial eclipse of the total eclipse. So it's really important to realize for people that for these eclipses, to see a true annular eclipse or a true total eclipse, you have to be in that umbral or antumbral shadow. Next slide. So the October 14th, 2023 annular solar eclipse in Minnesota. Here we're centered on Indianapolis, and we have a chart from Xavier Jubier. And you can click on these maps and get all the timings for your eclipse progression. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you can see right there, that little diagram shows you the maximum extent of the partial eclipse in Minneapolis. Next slide. So a partial eclipse, if you're outside of the antumbra. Next slide. An annular eclipse, if you're inside the antumbral shadow. Next slide. And you can see for this eclipse, the entire United States almost will see at least a partial eclipse. But to see the actual annular ring of fire, you'd have to be in that little round dot that just passed over the surface of the Earth there. Next slide. There's a more detailed map of the eclipse path. You can see the states it passes through, or the antumbra passes through. Next slide. And this is the eclipse from Minneapolis. So a partial eclipse, and you would always have to wear your eclipse glasses during a partial eclipse. Next slide. The big thing with eclipses, like all of astronomy, observational astronomy, is the weather. And where I live in the Pacific Northwest and people in Portland, it's not going to be a great chance of clear weather. The best chances of good weather are in New Mexico. And that's where I and probably a lot of you may be headed to see this eclipse. Next slide. As I said, when I do this presentation in Oregon, we look at the cloudiness percentages, and they're not good on the west side of the Cascades, especially Portland. Next slide. Are we locked up again? Again, weather is very important to be able to see an eclipse. And generally, this time of year in the Pacific Northwest is not a great time. So you'd have to travel to Nevada or farther south to get a better view. And I believe for Minnesota, the situation is the same. It's
Bob, we missed about 5 or 10 seconds off the beginning of this slide, I think. If you could highlight anything from that.
okay. Well, I'm just pointing out weather is very important in making your eclipse plans. So we could go to the next slide.
Conspiracy.
Okay, so there are different weather sites that give predictions. And again, for Portland, the percent of cloudiness is going to be right around 50% for the eclipse. And in Minneapolis, a little bit better than that. It looks like about 56%. And again, you're really taking your chances on whether you're going to see it. So it's a good idea if you want to see the eclipse, even for a partial eclipse, you might want to head to areas with better weather. Next slide. In New Mexico, where I am going, this will be the annular eclipse. And again, even though it's going right through the middle of the antumbra, you're seeing a lot of the bright photosphere still, and you would always have to have your eclipse glasses on. This is not like a total eclipse. You have to be wearing your eclipse glasses and have your telescope fully filtered. Next slide. Now for something completely different, we go to total eclipses. Total eclipses are a mind-blowing experience, and a lot of you probably have seen one. I've witnessed two. They're a religious experience. Next slide. I love this quote. Before you die, you owe it to yourself to experience a total solar eclipse. Now, again, when I've asked people if they've seen a total solar eclipse, they'll often say yes, but they saw it from a place where it wasn't total. It was a partial. So it's very important to emphasize that with the public, that you need to be within the path of totality in order to see a total eclipse in its full glory. The experience of a lifetime. No picture can ever convey what it's like to experience a total eclipse. And I've tried to come up with an analogy, and even an annular eclipse is just a glorified version of a partial eclipse. It's cool, but it's nothing like a total eclipse. So the next slide shows my analogy of what it's like to see a partial eclipse versus a total eclipse. There's no comparison to that. Next slide. A friend of mine, Mike McKeague from the Rose City Astronomers, we ventured to Central Oregon in 2017, and he's an expert photographer, and he computerized his camera system, so he was able to automate the entire picture taking process and was able to enjoy the eclipse as well. I sincerely urge people not to photograph the eclipse unless they've done something similar to that, because otherwise you get preoccupied with camera settings and tracking and all the rest, and you don't really experience the eclipse. It's like driving up to the edge of the Grand Canyon, getting out of the tour bus, snapping a bunch of pictures, jumping back in the bus, going home, and then looking at the eclipse, I mean the canyon, and you haven't really experienced it. So I really urge people not to waste their time taking pictures unless you're an expert like Mike and know how to set up everything ahead of time. Next. So this is the path of totality for the April 8th eclipse. Next. And if you don't get to see this eclipse, the next continental United States eclipse will be over 20 years distance in northern Montana, August 23rd, 2044, and then a year later, August 12th, 2045. So unless you're willing to jump on an airplane or get in a boat, you should try as hard as you can to see the April 8th, 2024 total solar eclipse. Next. So if you want to, eclipses occur about every 18 months somewhere on the surface of the Earth, and you can travel to some exotic places. Next. If you want to go to Antarctica or somewhere down in the southern hemisphere at an observatory, or get out on a cruise boat, and that's kind of a cool way to see it, especially if you can make sure you're not in a cloud path, which a boat can do. It's a lot of people do that, and it's a neat way. And they usually have all kinds of science lecturers and speakers and ways to make the trip more enjoyable. Next. Bottom line, get your donkey to totality. Next. So again, in Minnesota, driving to the path of totality is what I would highly urge you to do. Next. So it looks like going to somewhere in Illinois or Indiana would be closest to Minnesota. But we have again the proviso of what's the weather like on April 8th, 2024. Next. Again, you can see most of the United States will see a partial eclipse. But again, to experience totality, you have to be in that little bullseye. Next. And this is speeded up about 300 times to show you what the total and partial phases of the eclipse will look like. And Trina, are you able to get any music with this out there? Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it. There's some music in this slide.
The people inside the room can do it, but nobody online.
Okay. All right. Next slide. Again, from Eclipsophile, we're looking at the weather prospects, and we can see that the best chances of no clouds or low clouds are in Mexico. But I know several people in Mexico who say Mexico really isn't the place to wander off to see an eclipse, especially with lots of expensive equipment. And they basically go out of their way to say that Mexico is not safe. So I've decided we'll be headed to Texas. Texas and up through into Louisiana is the best, Arkansas rather, the best chances of reasonably clear weather. Next. And it doesn't take more than, for a totality that'll last only 4.5 minutes or so. It doesn't take much of a cloud to cover it up and kind of make the trip worth regretting. So the best thing to do is to be mobile, have a plan, know the roads, have maps, and be flexible on where you're going to be. Next. This is center line in Texas. And again, about over twice the amount of totality that we had in 2017 at about 4.5 minutes. And again, during totality, it's the only time you can remove your safety sun filter eyeglasses. Next. You'll be able to see some planets in the sky. Next. And this is again at Mr. Joubier's website is one of the best ones. You click anywhere on the map and it will give you all the eclipse timings of contacts, duration of totality, etc. Next. One of the reasons this eclipse is going to be really neat is it's going to occur near the sunspot maximum. So the corona is going to be much more dynamic than it was in 2017. As awesome as that was, it's going to be even more awesome this coming April. So preparation and tips, take the eclipse week off now, watch the weather, stay flexible. You want to be as close to the center line as possible. Pee before things get going. You don't want to be in the latrine for 4 minutes. Get your solar filter glasses now. They're going to become really difficult to come by the closer we get to the eclipse, etc., etc. And again, don't try to photograph it if it's your first eclipse. Experience it, even your second or third. Next. My friends and family at the 2017 eclipse, it's great to share with people. Next. And I'll briefly zip through safety because we're running out of time here. Next. Always wear your sun visor goggles. Next. You will damage your vision if you look at the sun's bright photosphere for too long. Next. Partial and annular eclipses, you must always wear the eclipse glasses. And then for a total, you must always wear them for the partial phases and only remove them for the total phase. Next. And you can't use these workarounds. Don't cheap out. Get real safety goggles. Next. Or a number 14 welder's glass. Those are perfectly safe as well. Next. To put them on, especially instructing kids, you have them look down, put the glasses on, and then look up at the sun. Next. For telescopic observation, your objectives gather quite a bit of solar radiation, and it doesn't sound like a lot, 1 milliwatt per square millimeter. Next. Just as with a magnifying glass, when you focus that down to a small area, that can become hundreds, if not thousands of watts of energy and very damaging to your eyes. So next. If your telescope came like my first telescope did with one of these sunglass filters, you take it away, you break it, and throw it away. You're not safe. But there's lots of safe filters available. They go on the front of the telescope, so no light damaging amounts of radiation enter the eyepiece. You can even make these your own out of a Botter Astro Solar material. Next. And here you see everybody using safe techniques to look at the sun. Next. If you don't have a filter, you can even make a pinhole camera. I did this when I was a kid and there was an eclipse at school and we all made these. Next. And you can always use a Ritz cracker or a spaghetti strainer, whatever else to make your own pinhole camera. Don't forget your hats and sunscreen. The older you get, the more you'll regret your exposure to the sun. So during a partial eclipse, you see the photosphere and sunspots and the moon biting into the disk of the sun. During a total solar eclipse, you'll have different effects. You'll have the diamond ring, Bailey's beads. You might see shadow bands, which are caused by basically the pinhole disk of the sun, very narrow sliver, creating a pinhole camera that shows the atmospheric turbulence between the moon and the Earth's surface through its atmosphere. Next. And then there's the diamond ring effect, followed by totality. Next. And when you see the corona through a telescope, it is just an amazing sight with pink prominences and these rays of the corona. So these slides will just advance with some music for people in the auditorium. And these are all just pictures of total solar eclipses from around the world. And it's just an amazing, magical, beautiful experience. And if you haven't seen one, please, please try to see it. It'll blow your mind. Partial phases and totality. All right, thank you all very much.
And this is kind of a culmination for 5 minutes, 2 minutes. It depends on how much we can talk fast before we get Mike up here to finish out last month's astrophotography presentation and contest and prize. And yeah, you take it away because I'm done.
Thank you, Trina. So last month, what did we do? Come on, we had an astrophotography Shark Tank and everybody got to talk about how tough it was for them to take their picture. Chris, for example, so I'm going to pick on you, right? You had the tree, you had your neighbor standing in front of your telescope. You still took an amazing picture. And some of you took pictures through clouds and some of you took pictures during the day. So you guys did an amazing job. And thanks to each and everybody who submitted pictures. But as we said, we're going to be handing out 2 prizes today. The first one is for the top winner and or the picture that got the highest score. And the second one is gonna be for the one that got the lowest score. They need to go to school and read Mike's book. Okay, we agreed on that. The worst picture will get Mike's book so that they learn how to do proper astrophotography, and hopefully next year they can do proper astrophotography. So the winner is okay, the winner is Mark Job, your Crescent Nebula image. So you got a $50 gift card. By the way, don't open it. It has an IOU. We'll get you the gift card later. Well, the IOU is signed by the president, so trust me, we'll pay it. So no, but you know, thank you, Mark, for this was an amazing picture. And I've seen a lot of Crescent Nebula images, but I love the details. And when I, tallied the scores, had 37 ballots turned in for scores and everything. This was by far the highest. The second one that came actually right behind it was Earl Bye's panoramic view of the Milky Way. That was also an amazing one, but this one actually won by a decent margin. And it's funny because, Mark, you didn't actually come to sell us on this, so it was a clear winner in a lot of people's minds, and it's good. And then everybody ready for the big loser? Trina! and yeah, so Trina, you're
So I said it proves that even if you're trying and you end up getting something that's not as beautiful and colorful as Mark's, but it's real and not processed, you can still win really cool prizes. It's great. So,
How did you manage to get it pink?
how did I manage to get it pink? I took it low on the horizon with a bunch of smoke in the atmosphere.
so now, Trina, you have a book to read. So next year, hopefully you have better images. And today, during Mike's lecture, you got to pay attention.
Oh man. All right. I will sit in the front row
Yep.
and pay attention.
Yep, we'll help you.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So-
I need all the help I can get.
So,
So thank you.
Well, thank you, Trina. And
Thank you
thanks,
for
Mike.
not voting for me. I appreciate it.
So, and I also wanted to, again, extend many thanks to each and everybody who sent the pictures. We had a record number of pictures this year. We had a record number of participants. This was really good. And I hope everybody got to enjoy it, and we'll do it again in a year. And hopefully next year, Chris, cut off your neighbor's tree, whatever it is, or move, right? And get us better pictures. And Trina,
Yes.
read the book.
I will read the book. I
So
will sit down and read it.
So yeah, and that's it. The next thing we're gonna do today is we advertise that if you show up in person, we're gonna be doing, a quick door prize here today. And the winners will get, Mike Shaw's astrophotography book. So, and hopefully we have 3 books, and this is only for people in person. It's the drive attendance, and looks like we have a full room. I counted 57. So that's good. So that's the good news. We have a lot of people. This is the highest attendance we've had since the pandemic. So everybody pat yourself on the back for coming over here. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is when I actually made numbers, I thought, 50 is going to be more than enough.
We have extra
So-
pieces of paper over here.
So
we
yeah,
can
so
hold
what I
to it.
want
So,
to do is everybody,
while Mike is doing his presentation, if it's not too disrupted, we will hand out numbers, and then we will, at the end of the evening or somewhere in between a breath break, we will announce number generated winner.
So yeah, I've
Yeah.
handed the bag. Yeah, just take one number, make sure it's one, and then pass it on to the next one. And then in the end, I have a random number generator where we are going to generate random numbers here in the top. The first three numbers are going to be the winners. Sounds good. So pass around the numbers. If you don't, I'm going to be in the back. If you don't get a number, talk to me and I'll give you a piece of paper with a number on it. Sounds good. And then in the end, we'll do the quick door prize and 3 people will get their books, and you can get Mike to sign them today. And, you know, Trina,
And
you should also get your
me,
book.
and we can learn together.
Yes. Yes. And now Trina will have people to study with her. Also, if you don't win a book, Mike is also, he has copies of his book, and you can buy a copy from him today, signed copy. You know, definitely do that. It's an amazing book. I was actually sitting, you know, flipping through it. It's really nice. I might just buy my own copy. Or I'll borrow Trina's.
No,
Sounds
we
good.
can learn together.
Yes, we can do that. And for that, I will hand it over to Mike.
Yep, we'll hand it over to Mike just while he's setting up. Next meeting is October 5th, and the new members orientation is Monday, October 2nd at the Egan Library from 6 to 8 p.m. So if anybody wants that, we'll also have that posted up online as well. So I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike. You can have a headset. You can walk around and do things.
Let's go ahead and get back into it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, my friends. Starting wandering in. That's my cue. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Let's go ahead and get back into it. Welcome everybody to the talk tonight on the beginner's guide to astrophotography. My name is Mike Shaw. You can call me Mike. Been looking forward to this for some time. When Ahmed contacted me about this opportunity, I was thrilled to be asked to do this. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think what I'll probably do is just blaze through the talk and then take questions at the end. And normally it's like I like the interaction and stuff during the talk, but I think we'll do that. So we'll go ahead and get started. So, how if I turn this thing on? There we go. All right, nightfall. Oh, can we turn the lights down a little bit? Night falls, darkness descends. And each night this is a person with a fishing line. It's a glow-in-the-dark lure. Each night for a few hours, we get to look at the cosmos as spaceship Earth astronauts. And then all too quickly, morning comes, and it's all over. This is up in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. So what I wanted to do tonight, one of the themes of the book and the sort of my approach to all this in general is that we really are all astronauts on spaceship Earth. And the view that we have is really no different than the view that the astronauts have. I mean, they're 250 miles closer to the cosmos, but so what? That's like a trillionth of a percent in terms of their proximity to the stars. So the good news is we don't need to get onto one of these things and get into outer space. We just go outside when it's dark. Now, I thought about this, and I know we're a little short on time, but I thought it might be kind of fun to tell you a little bit about me. And this all begins with John Glenn. And it's like, okay, Mike, what's that going on? Think about this. This person climbed into that little thing and was the first person to go around the Earth in February 1962, John Glenn. We also have Neil Armstrong, first human on the moon. What would that be like to be walking around on the moon and looking at the Earth and thinking about your chances of getting back in there? So these two people are important to me because Neil Armstrong had this space museum in Wapakoneta, Ohio, which is a wonderful museum dedicated to his career as an astronaut. And I visited this with my family when I was a youngster. I remember seeing this moon rock, and it was
We lost the audio. Hello, we seem to have lost the audio online.
Two destined to great astro things. And so with this, my older brother and I embarked on a robust model rocketry program. And how many of you have actually shot on this?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Hey, Mike.
This one.
Mike, could you hold 1 second? I think the audio went out online. Yeah, we're having issues tonight, aren't we?
I can hear something.
Sorry about that.
So for those of you who shot in Minnesota, oh yeah.
The spring, when it starts, next one, it's filled with the rock. Oh, yeah, it's good. Next year.
This seems to be a further graph.
Yeah.
Worse.
It's not touching it. Oh, I didn't do that this time. We're getting close. Just double check here. We're okay, I think.
All right. So with this budding, nothing like us all, with this budding career as an astronaut, I thought, okay, I'm just going to go off and get my advanced degrees in materials engineering, did a postdoc at Cambridge University for a couple of years, and lo and behold, I actually became a rocket scientist for some number of years. And it was a great time, but it was like, this isn't really my thing. I really like, presenting and teaching and talking about things. So then I became a university professor for some number of years, did that for a while, many years, department chair and all that, fully tenured. I thought, you know what, something is missing. And for this, I blame my mom and my dad. This is a picture of me as a youngster. I got full clearance to show this. And my folks were just inveterate travelers. This is the top one is I think in Norway, and the bottom one's in Italy. And people often ask, so Mike, how long have you been doing this? It's like, well, my whole life. This is me on the left. This is my younger brother in the middle and my older brother. And I think my dad or my mom has taken the photographs. So we've been photographing like forever. And, that's all fine. So going back to the situation back in Columbus, Ohio, this is a blow up of the region near my childhood neighborhood. And so think of this, one day, little Mike had enough and I was going to head out. I was going to run away from home. So I did. And I enlisted my mom's help and she set me up with a rod, those sticks with a little bindle at the end, a little red and white checkered thing. So I had that. It was all about the gear. And to this day, it's all about the gear. So I had my gear, go down the driveway, go down the street a little ways, and I'd had enough. I was like, okay, I'm good. I think I've explored the world. So I came back and my mom was like, what happened? What went wrong? It's like, well, I didn't know where to go. I didn't see anything. She said, let me show you something. So she pulled out this USGS topographical map, which of course she had, and she showed it to me. And she said, do you see, this is my mom right here. And this is her in her element. And do you see this lake? I was like, I do see that lake. And she said, that's the thing about maps is they show you things that you've never been to so you can get there. And it was like a light bulb went off. And to this day, I have been obsessed with maps. And of course, we have our terrestrial maps and our celestial maps. And in my new book, I created this, I haven't seen anything quite like this. It's a planisphere with the top 50 deep sky objects labeled. So especially people who are just getting into this, it's really hard to know where these objects are in the night sky. And that's a little bit of a close-up of it. So I was going to, if you had more time, do sort of a pop quiz of like, what's number 12? But we're going to do that. But then the other pivotal event happened is we moved from California to Minnesota in 2014. And that's not the only thing that happened in 2014. Taylor Swift released the 1989 album. And you might say, what's that got to do with it? Well, this had a real impact on me, honest to goodness. And, you know, her thing, I don't know if I didn't know a lot about this. My wife's a Taylor Swift fan, so now I am, and as one does. And in this album, she switched from country to pop, basically. And when she did that, her manager was like, "That's a terrible idea. No one is going to want a Taylor Swift pop album. You're a country singer." She's like, "Well, okay." And they were like, "Why don't you put a couple country songs on your new pop album?" Like, no. You have to pick a lane. And if you chase two rabbits, at some point you're going to lose both of them. It's like, wow, that's another bolt of lightning. So I thought, okay, I'm done with all that. I'm 100% done with the rocket science. I'm done with the physics professorship. I am going to be a globe-trotting photographer. And I stand before you as a globe-trotting photographer. So for better or for worse. So that's a thing I thought I would share. So we have your spaceship, we have your map, and we're going to explore the cosmos together. All right. So with that as a background, this is the book, in case you had somehow missed that. Going to be selling that later on tonight if you're interested. But what the book does, I'm going to slow down a little bit now, is it covers really two broad categories of astrophotography. There's landscape astrophotography, which includes the foreground, and then there's deep sky astrophotography, which doesn't. And they're similar but different in a number of different ways. And there's a third genre of, that kind of combines them, of deepscape astrophotography, which really centers around including a deep sky object with a foreground. It's a little bit more advanced, a lot of planning. It's great for puzzle solving rocket science engineers, and it's a lot of fun. So with that, this slide, and you can, by the way, you're absolutely feel free to, photograph any or cell phone snap any of these that you might like. I'd actually encourage that because, in addition to buying the book. But as you can see here, there's the deep sky landscape. And of course, there's examples at the top. But there's two columns, single image and stacked image, single image and multi-image blends. And then the top row are untracked and the bottom row are tracked. And I offer this as a framework for understanding some of the many different shots that you're going to come across if you get into astrophotography of any type. It can seem a little bit bewildering about how to organize, well, what's this and how do I do that and all that sort of stuff. So there's that. All right, so I'm going to go through very briefly a few different subjects. These are the Milky Way, almost everyone's favorite, myself included. The bottom two time lapses, the one on the left is from a stationary Earth, and the one on the right is from a stationary cosmos. And I just love, I call the projects on the right the spaceship Earth time lapses. And the one on the upper left is a single shot. The one on the upper right is a stacked blend. So you can see there's all sorts of different things. The moon, who doesn't love shooting? How many of you have tried shooting the full moon? Trina, yes, I know, it's a good thing. We're going to become moon buddies, I can just tell, But this was kind of a fun, this was just like a week or so ago. This was in White Bear Lake, over White Bear Lake Marina. And this is with this camera and this lens. This is actually the same setup. I haven't disassembled it yet. And it's from a stationary tripod. This is actually a video that I just took when I sped it up. There's nothing more elaborate than that. And the Star Tribune, picked this up and was kind enough to repost that. So yes, thank you for that. Star trails. How many of you have made star trails? Oh, so much fun. This is looking west, so the stars are coming in at an angle. This is kind of a fun. This is from a trip this summer, kind of a star trail project. Just focusing straight up into the Milky Way, and then I just twisted the zoom ring for the duration of the exposure, and then amped up the processing. We in Minnesota are so fortunate to have the aurora happening frequently. And as you heard from Bob's talk and from your own experience, we're at a very active type of the sunspot cycle. So for the next couple of years in particular, as we get closer to solar max, you all know this, there's going to be a ton of solar activity. So everyone's very excited about that. Now, this was the lunar eclipse of 2019, 2020, no, not 2019, 2021, perhaps, May of 2021, and Death Valley National Park. And what was striking to me about this is the, I don't know if you can see this, probably not on the screen at home, but on the right is the eclipsed moon, and on the left, well, you can see Antares in the middle of the screen. You can see the lingering vestiges of the Milky Way galaxy, they're near the galactic core. And it was just such an interesting thing normally if this was a full moon, it started off being a full moon, everything was completely washed out. So just a spectacular event. And of course, as you just heard about from Bob, the total solar eclipse coming up in April is just not to be missed. So this is a blend between, so for this shot, I actually hiked into Lake Solitude and Grand Teton National Park. Is an epic story. Set up my camera, shot the total eclipse with a bunch of partial phases, left the tripod in position. Later that night, after it became fully dark, I took a second exposure of just the night sky and then took from the same tripod position and blended them together. I ended up spending the night sleeping on a granite rock because there's no camping allowed because all the permits were long gone. But anyway, love this. I mean, this is like, I'm, preaching to the choir here. Many of you take much better versions of these than myself. Barnard's E, a fun thing. This one, Go. This one, Markarian's chain. And so, with that as a brief survey of some of the possible shots that you might undertake with landscape astrophotography, all of those are images that are in the book and described with the settings and so forth. Landscape astrophotography, deep sky astrophotography. These are the four main parts that go into us, from when you go from a concept to the result. There's the astronomy foundations, the photography foundations, planning, putting everything together, and then the editing. So I'm now going to not launch into a long description of astronomy because we're here and you all know that stuff. I will say it's kind of a fun thing, I probably consider this before, but if you think about the different subjects as a sort of a journey through the cosmos. I mean, when you take people on a trip as an astronaut, we're sort of, if you think of your camera as your spaceship, you can begin in the Earth's atmosphere, then you can go into the solar system, into the Milky Way, and then you can bust out of the Milky Way into the intergalactic space and come back into the interstellar space, and then come back into the atmosphere and land and go back to sleep and then wake up in an hour. So it's kind of a fun thing to think about. Anyway, photography, let's talk about this. I think this is kind of like the core of, and again, feel free to snap any versions of this with your cell phone. So this is a shot from a workshop in Mona Lake, California. This is one of the workshop students with their red headlamp. Moon hasn't yet set. This is a shot later the same night, same place. Beautiful, these like, calcium carbonate structures, formed at the bottom of this lake. Southern California sucked the lake dry, so they are now exposed. They're beautiful to wander amongst. Those are with a DSLR, and these are with cell phone. So the message here is you do not need to have super fancy gear to do night photography anymore. I mean, you can just, so you can just, if you have a cell phone, which I suspect we do, most of them can do very nice jobs of capturing even the Milky Way, which is a very faint object. So that's one of the key things that I'd like to talk about in the book, is that this is no longer the domain of specialized interests. However, if you want to, enlarge the shot or do some more sophisticated projects, a camera with a manual focus setting is essential. Manual focus and manual exposure. You have to be able to set the exposure manually because the autofocus and the autofocus and the auto exposure light meter doesn't really work very well at night. But if you have a camera and a tripod and, manual focus and a red headlamp, you're pretty much in business to do some really amazing astrophotography. So this is something that if you have this, or if you're thinking about getting this, then this is really all that you need. I want to say right now that you do not need a star tracker for night photography. A lot of times people coming into this, I get asked the question quite often, do I need a star tracker? And my answer is absolutely not. It's useful for a lot of things, but you don't need that for getting started. Here are the baby back. Here are the just the suggested camera settings. So manual focus, manual exposure. You want to make sure your auto ISO is switched off. The white balance, which doesn't have anything to do with the exposure, but it affects the color of the image. You really just not at an automatic white balance, because that's usually the default sign. If you're going to combine images or do a time lapse or anything like that, if the images have slightly different colors, then it's going to look weird. So I would recommend having a not auto white balance. And actually daylight works quite well. If your camera has a long exposure noise reduction feature, which is a powerful feature, but can get in the way of this stuff, I would personally recommend switching that off. And of course, use a raw file format. So now to the main event, what exposure settings should I use? Well, if you're in a dark location with no moon and no snow, those are three things that are not always easy to find. A dark location with no moon and no snow, that immediately cuts out half the year and then another. So it's like, then work and family and weather. And oh man, this is a pretty good place to start. A much higher ISO than most people are comfortable with. You're not going to break your camera if you use an ISO of 12,800. Many pictures, this is my third book, many pictures and all three of them are shot at 12,800. They look just fine to me and everyone else, I hope. However, you want to have as large of an aperture, a small of an f-stop as you can within limits. If you have a fast prime lens and maybe not quite wide open, but you want to have that to be open. And this is the aperture is the setting that I change the least in all of these different projects. I usually set it to be fairly wide open and then leave it. And then the shutter speed around 10 to 20 seconds, depending on your lens focal length. And we'll come back to that briefly. Now, having said that, okay, what was the ISO? 3,200 to 12,800. Minneapolis, Minnesota, downtown. ISO 400. Aperture of f6.3, 1.5 seconds. And yet, look, you can still see Orion. Just fine. You can see the Orion Nebula. No problem. Your cameras are amazing at the detail they can pull out. This was Duluth in May of 2015. Again, ISO 400. Aperture of 5. Each shot that went into this was a 1 second shutter speed. Look at all those stars. Right over the city, right over the aerial lift bridge. This was in St. Paul, Minnesota, just this last April, a few months ago, ISO 2500 with an aperture of f4 and 5 seconds. So when you think about these different realities, this is a great ideal if you're in Utah or Death Valley or, Namibia or someplace else. But let's be realistically, we're not going to see all these stars in situations like this routinely. So we don't have to wait until we go there to do some great night photography. I mean, you can go to downtown Minneapolis and shoot Orion over downtown. Just experiment with it. And you can see in all these cases, I mean, the aperture, I stopped that down just to make the image a little bit sharper. So anyway, there that is. Okay. The key thing I would say, however, and this is important, is to become familiar with the histogram, the image histogram of your images, and keep your eye on that. A lot of times in the dark, believe it or not, even though this image looks terribly underexposed on the screen, when it's 2 a.m, your eyes have been dark adapted for an hour, and you're looking at the back of the camera, which is a light source, that image actually looks pretty good. And this image looks terribly overexposed. So your natural inclination would be to say, oh, that's without looking at the histogram, oh, this is too bright, I need to ramp that down. And you come home with a bunch of things that look like this. It happens all the time when people get started with these things. So the way to avoid that is just make sure that you have a little gap between the left edge of the frame there and the leftmost peak in the histogram. And I can elaborate on that a little bit later if you like. Briefly on the shutter speed. Now, as you can imagine, this depends a great deal on the lens that you use. If you're using a telephoto lens, 20 seconds, you're going to have stars moving all over the place. Whereas with a 14mm wide angle lens, no problem with a 10-second exposure. So you may or may not have heard of the rule of 500 or the rule of 300 for determining your maximum shutter speed, but it basically goes like this. And for the physicists and the engineers and the science and math and numbers people, just don't pay attention to the units. Okay. So we're going to start out with the maximum. So the maximum shutter speed in seconds is equal to the number 300 divided by the focal length in millimeters. It works pretty well. So for example, if you have a 50mm lens, what this is telling you is 300 divided by 50 is only 6 seconds. So that means for a 50mm lens, you could really probably only get by with a 6-second-ish shutter speed and not have star trailing. If you get into the subject, there are people who are more or less how shall I say, rigorous about these calculations. I am not. There are many people who are, and it's a point of disagreement. So and there it is. If you're looking towards the north celestial pole or south, stars aren't moving quite so fast. They're still the same angular rotation, but they're just linear velocity through the sky. On the equator, things are zipping right along. So it depends where you're pointing. But my approach is I basically take a few shots, look at them, zoom in on them. If everything looks fine, good to go. Practical guides here are for lens focal lengths on the left, the calculated maximum shutter speeds, and then a practical guideline. So you can see that as the lens focal length increases, the maximum practical shutter speed starts to really drop. Now, lens focal lengths, for the Milky Way and for many constellations, 50 millimeters, 35 millimeters on down is a great range of focal lengths. But when we start getting into the 105 millimeter, 135 millimeter focal lengths and up, that's really when we are going to want to use a star tracker. So there's that to consider. But with that said, I mean, the other question that I often get is what lenses should I use? And my answer is always all of them. This is a circular fisheye. I don't know if you can see Split Rock Lighthouse there at the bottom. And this is just arcing straight overhead, just a glorious sight, looking straight up into the Milky Way. These are some star trails with a 14 millimeter lens, shot in the Alabama hills of California. This is a very long, a long set of exposures. I think 4 or 5 hours. Constellation Orion, setting again over mountain. This is the mountain at the bottom right is Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the continental United States. And of course, the Rho Ophiuchus molecular cloud region. This is shot at 135 millimeters. That's not a very telephoto shot. I mean, that's a pretty wide angle shot, all things considered. Mark has a question. 135 millimeters for Rho. Focusing briefly, I'm talking to people who do this all the time, so I don't need to tell you how to focus. Just make the stars as small as possible, not necessarily at infinity. But this loop. I have an example of one up here. Is a huge benefit to focusing your camera, and you literally just jam it against the LCD screen, and you can. I mean, my near focal point right here. I mean, my kids can read like this. They're reading like this. And I'm sort of out here, but this thing lets you, read like that. So it's a big help. Can you guys hear me okay at the back? Okay, it just occurred to me, I was like, so a focusing loop is a great thing to get. And if you go to my website, mikeshawphotography.com, there's a pull down page for gear, and it's got links to all these different things. So here's some useful things to get. Focusing loop, Plan B, this is actually Plan A if you're new to this, is put your camera on autofocus. So you put your camera on autofocus during the day, you focus on a cloud or a really far away building. And so you autofocus on that, and then you tape your lens ring and the focus ring in place. And then you turn your camera from autofocus to manual focus. And you're pretty much good to go. I do this all the time when I do those day to night transitions. During the day, there's no stars to focus on. So I'll just focus on something really far away and do this, and it works just fine. Another good thing to have is a remote shutter release. It helps minimize vibration. And if you have a programmable intervalometer, like I shown on the right, again, these are all images from the book, you can program in all kinds of crazy sequences, like 2-minute exposures if you're on a star tracker and things like that, if your camera doesn't have it, which it probably doesn't for that length. A Tiffin double fog 3 filter. That's I would ask you to say that in unison, but it would sound weird. I don't know what the double fog 2 filter is. I don't know what the single fog 3 filter is. I just don't. Well, I know the double fog 3 is way to go. So you get this filter, and you literally, as I show you the bottom right, you literally just hold it in front, get the 4x4 inch by 4 inch square version, which is this one. And if you just hold it in front of your camera, what it does is it's a diffusing filter. So it spreads out the light intensity from the stars, and it causes the intensity to drop. So instead of saturating the pixels and producing white stars, you can actually see the star colors. So a Tiffin double fog 3 filter is a great way to get images that really, have the stars popping. Compass is always a great thing to have. Phone has one. Phone can die. It's in the cold. The compass on the right always works. Yes. Yes. Great question. So the question is, when you use the double fog 3 filter, would you just use it on one shot, or do you have to use it for multiple shots? And the answer is, I would recommend using it with 2 shots, one with and one without, because when you use it, the foreground gets very fuzzy and soft. And so in Photoshop, you can remove the foreground from the not one and put that on the one of it. So it's really, but you can use it just as is. And a stone bag is a great inexpensive way to really stabilize your tripod. Glow in the dark tape, another great tip. And then star trackers. And I'm just going to not talk about star trackers because that's a whole different thing. But star trackers are about one there. They're great, wonderful things. Things that can go wrong. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And all it takes is from one of them go wrong and the whole thing's off. And believe me, I've done every one of these things. And I think many of you have too. This was a glorious shot. I had this moon setting. I had this reflection in this little pond of water. And unfortunately, I had just tapped everything out of focus. So it was worthless. That was on the same line as this. It was a great story about these people with headlights. I don't have time to tell it. But sometimes people just are, and the thing with these people is they kept the headlights on the entire time. We're like, hey, we're doing night photography over here. Like, hello. They're like saying hello back. And anyway, crazy. Fog. How many of you have seen this, right? It's definitely a Minnesota thing. One time I was stopped by law enforcement. I was at a wildlife refuge and I had a permit. I very carefully produced the permit and everything. We had a nice chat, but this was a single shot from a time lapse, which is why I was able to capture that. And then the bug. Bug hung out there for quite some. It does look like a heart. Never thought of that before. There it is. And then this was a great one. This was in Death Valley, and I artfully set up this time lapse so that there would be a moon reveal. So when the moon came up, it would like illuminate the foreground, including my tripod shadow. So that was kind of a bummer. So this is something I don't want to belabor many of these things, but here's something to think about so planning is like the third part. I'm probably not going to talk too much about processing. I'll just mention a couple things you might be interested in. But when it comes to planning, I'm a great believer in planning. This is a screenshot from the blend of a predicted lunar eclipse sequence and then an actual lunar eclipse sequence. And you can see how well things line up. So with planning, the point I want to make here is, by the way, this is an AI person. I asked my AI image generator to create an image of a person with a camera looking at a photograph. And if you look very carefully, I think she's got about 8 fingers. But, other than that, it's pretty convincing. So I don't quite know who owns this image, but in any event, I just want to raise your awareness that when I think about planning a shot, there's 2 main types of shots that you want to think about. And when I would do a workshop, I'd hand out an index card, you draw an example, I'd ask you to categorize it. But there's a big difference between these 2 shots. Someone, just for the heck of it, just raise your hand and tell me a shot you want to capture. I know there's some very outgoing people here, so this shouldn't be a problem. Looking at you, Judy Babcock. Yeah. Or you or Mark or Trina. Thank you. That answered the question. Anybody else? Milky over the bug. Anyone else? Pardon? Full moon under the, thank you. Okay, so with the Milky Way, what Judy said was something in the sky. And so when we have something in the sky, if we're going to shoot the Milky Way, we're not going to be doing that in January or December. So if we have a sky priority planning process, we pick the thing first, and then we pick where we're going to shoot it from. We start off with a date and a time, let's say July at 10 p.m. Okay, well, that's going to be in a particular part of the sky. Then we have to find something that's a good foreground looking in that direction. The lift bridge with the full moon, we want to be thinking in the direction of the full moon. It's kind of a combination. But the lift bridge, there's a lift bridge split rock lighthouse. There's only really a few different spots that you can stand and photograph those. And so then you have to locate your tripod location and direction. And then it's like, okay, what can I put in the sky that would be part of that? Like, I'm not going to be shooting the Milky Way behind the left bridge unless it's in May and there's a power outage in Duluth or something like that. But it's just keep this in mind, because a lot of times you can kind of go around in circle, because here's the thing, I'm going to shoot the Milky Way behind it, but I can't find, you kind of go back and forth when you have to pick one or the other. In the book, as I mentioned, there's this planisphere with the top 50 deep sky objects, in my opinion. I've created a table at the back that lists them all with a ton of information. Took forever to proofread that thing. I'm still nervous, so please don't really look at it, because you'll probably find something. Mark's had it now for a while, so he hasn't called me up yet, so I'm waiting. Stellarium's a great, y'all use Stellarium, yes? Yeah. Question for you. These are 6 different deep sky objects. We all know what they are. And the red frame is the same field of view, angle of view. So this, I don't know if you can see it, but each one of these objects has a red frame around it. And that's my 500 millimeter ocular view in the Stellarium. So how big do you think the moon is? If I reveal the moon in my 500 millimeter frame, how big is it? You're right, it's really small. Or these things are really big. And look how big the Andromeda Galaxy is. Look how big the Pleiades is. Look how big the North American Nebula is. I mean, these things are huge. They're large, deep sky objects that you can easily, if you can photograph the moon with your camera, you can easily photograph these other things because they will fit in your frame. All right. Last thing I want to talk about before I get into the questions and stuff is are these planning apps. Because if you have yet to come across these, your mind will be blown, particularly with Planet Pro. So I don't really have time to talk about one thing with PhotoPills. So Planet Pro is an app that costs $10 to download once. It's not a recurring thing. And it has the capability of turning your smart device into a virtual camera. And the way it does this is once you specify your camera location, the date and the time, and the camera direction, it goes to the Google map or the Bing map or whatever database you choose. It goes to that map, the map's database, and it pulls the 3-dimensional terrain data. And then you say, okay, I want to use let's say a 50 millimeter view and I'm facing in this direction, this time and date. And it will figure out what's in the night sky for that location on that time and date and draw in the foreground. And if you don't like it, you can then like pinch and zoom or maybe move the camera around a little bit. So let me give you a few examples. This was from July of this year. And this was in Glacier National Park. I was teaching a workshop with Brian Peterson. I was doing the night stuff and he was doing the day stuff. And how many of you have been to this? This is on the Road to the Sun. Yeah. So this is on the way to Logan Pass, and it's a very popular place to pull off. And this is there's 2 images shown here. The image on the right is what Planet Pro predicted. I'd never been here before, and I've never shot the Milky Way here before, but this is what Planet Pro predicted. If you look very carefully, this is with a 28 millimeter lens, and lo and behold, this is what actually happened on the left. This is from last week. This is the night before. This is last Tuesday in downtown St. Paul. I had a private session where someone wanted me to help them shoot the full moon, so we thought we'd just go downtown. And you can actually create representations of, very crudely, of course, representations of the St. Paul Cathedral and, photograph the moon next to that. This was one of my favorite shots. It shows the constellation Orion through the North Window Arch in Arches National Park, just as the crescent moon was setting to the west, which is off to the right. 20 minutes after this shot, the arch was black. So there's a super narrow window when this shot was capable. And this delight, I had this all figured out. And I've had the place all to myself right up until this couple showed up and said, oh, would you take our picture? I'm like, I am Mike Shaw. I am an artist. So I was like grumpy Mike for a while. And they finally, I was like, okay, all right, go ahead and stand over there and hold your hands. And oh my gosh, that's the shot. So it's on the back cover of my book. I mean, it's a great shot, So the lesson itself is don't be grumpy Mike. That's that one. Full moon over Mount Whitney. I mean, it just goes on and on. You can do star trails. Here's Ellingson Island and near Split Rock Lighthouse. And, if you look carefully, it shows you the exact shooting direction, the focal length you choose, the date and the time. There's a custom marker, as I said, representing the island. It has the complete Messier catalog in there, so you can actually, and then some. You can actually, if you want to shoot any of the Messier objects, it has that in there, along with a very crude but effective representation of it. And if you look carefully here, you might even be able to see at the very bottom, it's like the outside looking in of Scorpius. You can see the little blue, you can see Antares and the 3 at the very bottom. Anyway, so it's got a ton of stuff in there, dark sky map, etc. And if you also go to my website, you can use your phone to scan this QR code, or just go to Planet Pro Tutorials, Mike Shaw, and I have a list of all the tutorials that I actually collaborated with the developers of Planet Pro. So we created about 20 or 30 tutorial videos that are included within the app. So if you go to the app and you click on that little red square at the bottom left, it'll bring you to the same two videos, but this is just a convenient way of learning the app. So if you're on the treadmill, or driving to Duluth, or doing your taxes, all those things, you can do this. I do use photo pills for when I'm in the field and I want to know exactly where something's going to be, like the Milky Way or star trails or whatever. This is when I was in Anza-Borrego, I think a couple of years ago. And this is actually on the top behind is a view through my phone's camera of the scene with these dinosaurs. And you can, change the time to later the same night, and it shows you what's going to appear. And it's great. It does a really nice job of that. The only catch is you actually have to be standing there. Whereas with the Planet, you can do it, at home in your pajamas, basically. So they do a lot of great planning. These are my two. I love Astrospheric. How many of us use Astrospheric? Yes, all the time. Gaia GPS. How many of you use that? Wow. Does anyone use Gaia? Wow. Okay. Consider a couple of people. Yeah, the great thing about Gaia is that it has all these different map layers that you can choose between at any time, like National Park Service. I think there's a subscription for that, but National Park Service, there's like public lands, there's bike paths, there's all kinds of different maps. And you can just, whenever you have a map displayed, you can choose. It's like when you have Google Maps, you choose between aerial view and street view. It's like that times 100. And the key thing is, when you're off the grid, even I suppose you're getting the satellite information because you always knew this GPS satellites. You can say, hey, this is a really cool spot. I want to save this spot. And then when you get back on the grid, it syncs up to your account and it saves all that. And furthermore, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of the Gaia screenshot, there's a little camera icon. And when you're driving around, if you see something that looks really cool, you can just click that icon and it will take a picture and link that to the waypoint. So you can always remember, oh, that's what that looked like. So if you're out scouting for spots, it's just incredibly useful. So those red dots are a few of the spots that I came across. I'm a big fan of a plan, planning it all, putting it all together. Briefly on post-processing, there's two things I wanted to say. This one just came out a few months ago in Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. And that's this denoise function, which is great. So if you shoot at those high ISOs, investigate the denoise capability of Lightroom, it works well. It's time consuming, but it works well. As you can see here in this example, this was on the left is the I don't know how well you can see the difference, but it does a nice job of cleaning up the color, the luminance noise. The other thing I wanted to say is if you're not familiar with this, the Lightroom gives you the ability through these masking local adjustments that it automatically will select the sky. So you say, Lightroom, select the sky for me. And it goes through your image and uses AI to figure out where the sky is. I used to do this by hand. It was incredibly tedious and it didn't look great. This works so well. You can then say, then you can invert the same mask and you can just work on the foreground. So the AI masks and the AI denoise in Lightroom are great features. I want to wrap up with this case study. So this is how you may go about, planning a shot. This is a deepscape. I'm going to introduce you to deepscapes. So I had this idea. I wanted to shoot. This is when it ended up being the cover of the book. So I wanted to shoot Rho Ophiuchus over a mountain. So I found this spot in the Eastern Sierra, and this is what planet said that it would look like. So when I had a very, very, very narrow window of opportunity to shoot this. It was a windy night. It set relatively early. And once it set, it set. And I get there and it's cloudy, which is not great. So anyway, I shot the foreground. This is a 4-minute foreground exposure. And in Photoshop, I use the AI sky identification tool to find the sky and delete just the sky. So I have this shot with just has this nice clean foreground. So I put that on the back burner. Then I started tracking. I did that at home. But I started tracking the row. I knew where in this shot, I knew that this complex was in the middle, it was in the center of the image, about 3/4 of the way up. So when I started tracking row, I put row there in the middle of the image, about 3/4 of the way up. And then I stacked about 20 images, which is what I got before it's set. And you can see how the the first image was when row was way above the mountain. And then I simply took the foreground and stuck it on top of the night one. And I got the one that's in the middle. And I took that and, edited it. Well, so this is here we go. So this is what's actually happening when it's really windy. You're going to see the tripod just about fall over here in a second. The clouds come in. It's going to like, and there it says, wow, I don't think did you see the tripod move? Yeah, okay. Because I mean, it's like it's in. I was watching this one. I didn't really see that one. So, I mean, I just about had a heart attack because this is 100. This is with 135 millimeter, I think, prime lens. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. The same. And so, when you compare what Planet predicted with what the shot looked like, it's phenomenally accurate. I mean, it's just mind-blowing how it can go to the map database and basically recreate the foreground and allow you to do this. Okay, there's the book. For the people at home, you can scan the QR code. It says recorded, so you can come back and do that. If you're interested, I'm offering sort of an online workshop over September 18th and 25th. It's $200, 2 2-hour sessions. It's recorded. It's limited to 20 people. Got 8 people signed up so far. There's still room. And if you want to really, and we're going to be using Planet to plan the annular eclipse. So if you're interested in that at all, thought I'd say that. These are my 2024 workshops. The reason I'm showing these now is that some of these are still opening in September, but I have several in Minneapolis, which is a little bit unusual. Got a couple of small school-age kids, so I'm just kind of sticking around next year. But I have a workshop at the end of January on using Planet, basically. So if you want to learn how to use that shot, you learn how to use that app, come to that. Lofoten in Norway with Brian Peterson, image processing in March, totality workshop, star tracker workshop, time-lapse workshop, the Aurora Summit. I'm going to say a few minutes about that. And then there's another workshop with Brian in Iceland of next December. The Aurora Summit. Where's Dave Faulkner? Dave, what can you say about the Aurora Summit? Oh, sorry. All right. Want to get this in? Oh.
So the Aurora Summit is a little different because it's not really an astronomy summit, more of a photographer's summit. So the people who go there are people who really love to observe the aurora and take pictures of the aurora, and it's a lot of fun. I know that Mark Jobe went last year. He's going to go again this year, right? And it's held up on the south shore of Lake Superior. So if there is aurora, we got a really nice view of it going to the north. And then there's some fantastic photographers up there who've shot the aurora and have some amazing pictures of that. And Bob King usually speaks at it. Of course, Mike does. I've spoken at it a couple times. They do make a little bit of astronomy into it and some other topics, but it's primarily about the aurora and photographing the aurora. And Dixie Burbank also has these Aurora tours, and she goes to Iceland and Norway and Alaska. And she has these tours that she takes people on, and she's done it several times. She's an expert in these. She's got them all planned out, and they're really amazing trips too that she offers. So it's a lot of fun. It's usually the first weekend in November, and I highly recommend going.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, it's pretty economical. I think I can't remember the exact prices, but this year we have a keynote speaker. We have a banquet on Saturday. The keynote speaker is Alan Dyer. So if you know Alan, this is a chance to meet him. And that's my website. Yeah, if we're not connected on social, there's my Instagram and all that stuff. So I'd love to take some questions. Thank you for hanging in there. And of course, I have a ton of books to sell if you're interested in buying one of the books. So I'm going to turn things back to our meeting hosts.
Yeah, how about, wait, give that to Mike.
About different frames all combined together, dodge, burn, that sort of thing. Almost more a drawing than a picture. Where do you fall in the post-processing, turning it up to 11 and all that?
Yeah. So the question is, how much is too much really in post-processing? And honestly, goodness, I mean, I don't care. I mean, it's like everyone's different. It's like if we all went into a restaurant, it's a great question. And some people, it's just, they just don't like that. And some people don't like this. And it's very, very personal. And ultimately, it doesn't matter because there's no like council of elders who is dictating if this is so, I mean, if you put something out there that's at 11 or 12, you're going to get people like block. So it's just up to you. So whatever you choose to do, my friend, is what you want to do. And if whatever that person does, that's fine too. And it's all fine. So personally, I wouldn't necessarily do the 11. I might come up to 9, but it's surprising how like one person's too much is another person's. Oh, I mean, I teach workshops with this person. I teach workshops with this person. This person is a by the book science journalist. This person is let's make the Milky Way green and purple. And people love both of them. It's a great question, though. Thank you.
Mike?
Are you online? Go ahead.
Yes.
Mark. Bit about talk about some of the equipment because I've been a bit of a shutterbug for most of my life. I don't consider myself a professional, even though I have a, shall we say, over a dozen lenses. But I have an only Canon T5. And one thing I've learned is that cheap is the cheap does. When you get cheap lenses or cheap equipment, you're going to get the rather limited quality out of it. But the thing is, I'm wondering, what do you consider the bare minimum of some of the type of equipment you actually want to try? Because some of the lenses, that you can spend the rest of the night on lenses, I'd say. But with the camera itself, what would you suggest on that respect? At least work with.
Great question. So the question is, equipment, like what do you need to get going? And honestly, it's absolute. I mean, I don't mean to cop out, but it is an absolute spectrum because, as I said, you can. I mean, half of it is the picture, but half of it is the experience standing in the dark on the shore of Lake Superior or in Utah and just feeling the wind and smelling the smells and just being in nature. I mean, that is, and what you bring back from that is great, but it's, and you don't need anything to experience that. It's just being there. And so, if you're just starting out, a basic DSLR with a kit lens and a relatively inexpensive tripod is enough to get you going. Decide if you want to invest more in that. A cell phone is enough to get you going these days in all seriousness. You'll find people with 20, I know one of the people who were the clients, so to speak, has probably $25,000 worth of gear. And they're like, have that same expression. This isn't quite working for me. I need to get X, and it's just like, where are we going with this? So it really, again, it comes back to your individual inclinations, how much time and money do you have to spend on this thing? But the thing I would say is don't let equipment hold you back. And, sure, if you get a DSLR with a fast prime lens, it's going to produce more finer resolution. images, but than a cell phone. But how many of you have been on a workshop and someone with a cell phone takes better pictures than someone with the, high-end gear? So, I mean, it's just like one of those things. So it's, yeah. So it's so good. Yeah. So don't let equipment hold you back. Get out there and really enjoy just being under the night skies.
Learn to use what you got, correct?
Pardon me? I didn't quite get the question. Will you please repeat it?
Learn to use what you have.
Yes, agreed. Yes, absolutely. Anything else?
Yep, I think I do have a question back here.
Okay, and then we have one over here.
All right. Where?
Oh, one there, but go ahead back there. Oh,
Look. Otherwise the people at home can't hear you.
Yeah, great talk. You didn't mention light pollution.
didn't.
Topic came up earlier in the meeting with us in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
What do you recommend as far as filters or no filter? Do you do it in post or?
Great question. So the question is, Mark Jobe had a great note on the Globe at Night Citizen Science Project. Super important project. Any participation is valuable because light pollution is a serious issue. The onset of LEDs replacing incandescents. There's a whole thing on this. One way to mitigate this is to use what's called a light pollution filter, which is designed to remove the wavelengths of sodium vapor lights that are incandescent lights. I don't know of any that exist for LED lights, but even the sodium vapor LED light pollution filters are modestly effective. And so it's certainly not a silver bullet. I did a research project with the Bell Museum during the pandemic, as it turns out, where I looked at, with and without light pollution filters all across the state and different light pollution levels, and really not a huge effect. So my advice would be to again, don't let light pollution hold you back. It's just getting out there and enjoying it. But, drive out of the cities, maybe 100 miles, and you'll be in Solana State Forest, north of here is a great spot. And if you search light pollution map, you'll get an online clickable thing. And also the Planet Pro app has built into it a light pollution tool that has a nice map showing that stuff. Thank you. It's a great question.
Any others? Okay. We are. Yeah, go ahead online.
Yes. Hey, Mike, this is Pavan. I live in Lake Elmo. Sometimes like it's Bottle 5 skies. This one time I was trying to photograph the Andromeda Galaxy using ASI 224MC, which has a micro third sensor, and I couldn't get it within my frame. I use a star tracker. What do you recommend when we use a telephoto lens like 300 millimeter or over, and we want some things to get in the frame? It's really impossible, or possibly I'm not using the right tools to get stuff into the frame. What do you recommend? How do we exactly focus on a tiny object, which to get that into a frame?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. So the Andromeda Galaxy is, as I indicated, a large target. Several, couple of degrees, 2.5 to 3 degrees in size. And the big answer to your question would be to do what's called a mosaic, which would be to shoot parts of it and then stitch those together. And that way you'd be able to get a high resolution image of the Andromeda Galaxy with your telephoto lens. But in terms of capturing it and centering it and getting it in the field of view, it just takes a little bit of practice and, trial and error. And I think the journey is part of the fun for all of us, is that, every time we go out, we get a slightly different, slightly better version of our result. And it's that constant refinement that keeps us going. When I look back at my very first Milky Way shot, I recoil in horror. And yet at the time I was so proud of that and, all that good stuff. So thanks very much for the great question.
Okay.
I think we have one last one.
Yeah, one.
Okay.
You mentioned the Bell Museum. We took a class using software called JS9, where you can download NASA's library and different red, green, blue filters, and then do your own layering and according to your taste specifically. It was fun. Are you familiar with JS9 and the NASA library? I mean, it's kind of the same thing. It's without equipment. You just see what's online, and you could do beautiful work right on your workstation at home.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I've dabbled with that. And I'd recommend anyone who's interested, this is a deep sky capability using someone else's telescopes that you can, search. And I don't think you can actually dictate a particular program, but you can. Okay. So there's a chance to do that. So if you want to like operate a huge, and there's different organizations, there's one called slooh.com, SLOOH.com. But I'm like anything. Yeah, absolutely. Please, yes. I mean, anything that connects you with the cosmos is just to me a great thing, because it's something that transcends, cultures and transcends. Here's when I was looking at listening to Bob's talk earlier tonight, and the thousands of years of knowledge that's passed. I mean, it just blows my mind that people who have a life cycle of a lifespan of maybe 35 or 40 years, thousands of years ago, were able to measure and record these natural phenomena that would take hundreds or thousands of years. I don't get how people would institutionalize that knowledge. But that's just me. But anyway, great question. So I'll hand this back to Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, we have 2 more things before we can send you off to Old Chicago and to come up here and talk with Mike and have out his book and sign books for autographs. We have to give a couple away.
Yep.
So,
First thing, everybody got a number? If you don't have a number, I still have. Okay. Want to get started, Trina?
sure, I can do that.
Just tap generate and then we'll call out the number.
Any what is that, drum rolls? Thank you. All right, who is number 53?
53.
It's a great year. Perfect. All right, book 1 down.
Congratulations.
Book number 2 goes to number 21. Who has that? Oh, Alan has that one. And then Matt, you want to touch the last number?
Go for it.
There, you can keep the number.
And the last number is 3.
Who's got 3?
There you go, Brandon. Came all the way from Texas to win a book.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, us winners will get together and we will learn things.
Yep.
And next year we'll have better image. Well, okay, maybe I'll have a better image next time. But all right, do you have anything else?
Yeah, so for those who won, congratulations. For those who didn't, if you still want to get the book, come here to Mike. He'll sell you his copy of the book and sign it. And if you can't get it tonight or you're online, I think they can buy it online, Mike. Right?
Website, there'll be a link under Beginner's Guide to Astrophotography. And the publisher is Rocky Nook. And so you go to the Rocky Nook website, search for my name, and it'll show up. So again, thanks so much again. And I forgot to, I'm terrible at this stuff. I have a newsletter sign-up sheet. So if you're at all interested, I know many of you are already on it, but I'll put this out on the table. If you want to just put your email onto that, then I can add you to that so you can learn about upcoming events.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mike. And pretty much, thanks everybody. We're trying to do fun things to do here in our meetings, and they work the best when you're in person. So please try to attend in person. So thank you. That's all I have.
Good night, everybody. See you on October 5th.